PreAP Calculus, looking at free response number 49. This is our final one of pre-calculus. Identify which trig function represented by the graph of f of theta. Explain how you know. Well, f of theta is this fella. If there's vertical asymptotes and then there are curves that are similar to y equals x cubed, cubic function, it's either tangent or cotangent. If it begins and ends the period at 0 and has a vertical asymptote halfway between, well, that's tangent. So I'm going to say that f of theta is tangent of theta. And then I will say, let's see, explain how you know. Because tangent of theta has vertical asymptotes at, I won't say that, because tangent of theta touches the midline at the beginning and end of the period. And has a vertical asymptote at the middle of the period. The word cycle could be used to interchange period here and probably would have been better to say cycle. And then I could also say that the tangent curves are similar to y equals x cubed. Each of the curves, not the totality of it. Points for this, let's see, you would get a point for simply saying that this is tangent of theta. Then you would get a point for a good description of how you know that's true. B, which trig function is g of x? Well, I would say that's sine. G of theta equals sine of theta. How do I know this? Well, sine of theta touches the midline, beginning and middle and end of the period. I mean, really, I'm just choosing between this and cosine. At this point, if you don't know the difference between the main graphs, this one's either sine or cosine, you got big problems. So as far as points go, you get a point for saying that it's sine, and then you get a point for some type of an explanation that makes sense. C, identify the domain and range of the graph of a function defined by y equals -3 times g of theta. G of theta was sine. The domain is all real numbers. So that's not affected by any numbers because it goes negative infinity to infinity. The range for this normally goes from -1 to 1. But since the amplitude here is 3, it's going to go from -3 to 3. So we will say this is because the amplitude is 3. That's good enough for me. So 1 point for the domain, 1 point with range with explanation. D, is the equation cotangent of theta equivalent to negating f and then adding or then subtracting pi over 2 to theta? Is that true? Well, let's see. If we take this function that you see here, if we translate it to the right half pi, and then we do a vertical reflection, is this the same as cotangent? It sure is. So we would say that it's true. So cotangent of theta is equal to negative f of theta minus pi over 2 is true. And we would say this because, let's see, the negative coefficient causes a vertical reflection. And then we could say the pi over 2 translates the graph of f of theta right pi over 2. Points for this, you get a point for saying it's true, a point for saying what the negative coefficient does, and a point for saying what pi over 2 does. Good enough.